Okay, so as we get further along on our characters, we need to talk about how to organize them and how to kind of prep them for animation by talking about some of the ways in which they would be animated. So I have a couple of characters here from the book, and this one is from the Hinging Parts chapter. This one is from the 2.5D Monkey chapter. And one of the things that we haven't really talked about yet is a type of anchor point that's a little bit different. So um, at one point we talked about let me zoom in here. There we go. We talked about anchor points in terms of how things are drawn, and so this is an anchor point. You click on it, and it's got these Bezier handles, and that's one type of anchor point. There is another kind though, and unfortunately, it's the same word, but it means something pretty different. If I grab this free transform tool, you'll see that there's this white dot, and it looks like it's in the center. And it is true that if you make something, and I turn it into a symbol real quick, by default it will be in the center, right? So I have this square and this anchor point is in the center, but I can move it to wherever I want. And if it's in a center, that's why things rotate around the center, and that's why things scale from the center. However, if we move it to this corner, now it's going to rotate around that corner, and it's going to scale to that corner. Now, 95% of the reasons why you would move that anchor point has to do with rotation. And has to do with rotation because we can see here in this character that these anchor points have been moved so that the pieces rotate in a way that makes sense. If I put this in what is about the center here, you get that, which means you'd have to rotate it like this and then move it like this. No. That's an insane amount of work. And so you can see that the character has already been prepped with the anchor points where we want them. Now it's placed down here for a different reason. But most of the pieces are in a place that you would expect them to be, right? His ears even are made to be wiggled around. And this is on purpose. This is like one of those prep things you do before you animate. And this is another reason why you want to kind of have everything separate pieces so you can see this arm is separate from the other things. But it's the things that make up the arm, the fingers, the the individual sleeve versus the hand versus the fingers. All these things, they've been combined into one piece because they're all going to move together, right? So you keep things separate as you're making it because it's always easier to kind of put them together, but eventually you put things together in a way that you only have to move one piece so that you can animate by moving one thing around. Now, in some cases, you may have to move multiple pieces at the same time. For example, his eyes, I happen to know through clicking around, are all, there we go. His nose, his eyebrows. Now, these are all different pieces. So if I wanted to rotate his whole face right now, I'm ignoring his hair for a minute, I would need all of these. The problem is, if I move this for multiple items that are selected, so I can, rotate around the same point, once I unselect, it doesn't remember that anchor point. It can only remember anchor points for individual objects. It doesn't save them for groups of objects, because as far as it's concerned, I've just selected a new group of things, and I bring up my free transform tool, and you can see the bounding box is even it's oriented to the world, so you can see it's square like this. Whereas before, you can see it kind of fits the head better, and then when I rotated it, right, it was oriented this way. So this is one of the things we have to be concerned with. Now, depending on how you would animate it, this is all theoretical, we're not animating these right now, but depending on how you were to animate it, you could put everything inside a movie clip. That we saw that with the witch, and then that way you could move them all at once. This is similar to what's actually going on his shirt. If I was to make a test movie of this, there's actually animation on his shirt, and it's inside a movie clip, right? So that would be one way. You would put everything together, and then if you ever needed to, move his eyes around to, whoop, That makes no sense. To change his expression or change where he's looking, you would have to do it on the interior. And that's possible, but sometimes that's not what you want to happen. The other thing you can do is leave yourself a marker inside this thing. So I can make a new layer, and I can just grab the circle tool, and I'm going to make it a object just to be easier to deal with. And I'm going to put a circle where I want the anchor point to always go. And this might take a bit of trial and error because I can't see the other pieces right now. And nope, that's not in the right spot. Especially since I can't, whoops, I can't see it behind the ear. There we go. So what I could do is, yes, it's annoying to have to click everything all the time, but maybe you don't always have to move every piece. So there we go. But then I could snap this here. I have to turn snapping off because snapping is the thing that makes it, move more than you want it to. There we go. And then now I could bring that down here, and if later on I'm like, oh, I need to select multiple things, I could move this back to where it was, and then I could move this back up from the same location. You'll notice, by the way, when I select a bunch of stuff, undoing means undoing each selection. That's a feature, not a bug. Every time you select something, it is a thing that happens, and therefore a thing that needs to be undone. So something to keep in mind. All right, so there's different ways to organize things. Sometimes different shots will be organized differently. So maybe this shot is something where we don't want we need these things to be completely separate, and there might be other shots where it's just all baked into one layer. All right, so a lot of that will depend on your animation. For your purposes, for your character, you make your best judgment as to what would happen the most. So what I don't want to see is every single tiny little piece is separate. Like you don't want to be handy in something where the pupil is on a different layer than this, is on a different layer than this. Like that's too much. And we don't want to see everything is just on one layer and in one movie clip and all smashed together. You want to make a good effort to guess where things would go. There's not necessarily a wrong answer as long as you're kind of in the middle there of, making a good faith effort to decide these things will move together, these things will move separately. All right. The other example of this one here, I pointed out, first of all, because you can see like a lot of the stuff we get, it's all in one movie clip. So I have to double click it in order to see all the different layers. I want to show you what it looks like when it's done. This is the animation they gave us. And the particular chapter is about like sort of faking this 2.5 dimensional look. That's very repetitive. So I think we can see him if there we go. So this is the kind of look they gave him. And I pointed out because the way he's built, you can see these arms, the anchor point is there because we want them to stay on, right, the vine. And what that means is in order to get this, you can see technically the arms are actually behind his head and we don't see where they connect to the body. That's on purpose, right? They're trying to hide something that would be impossible to match. If this, let me see if I can move it up. This attaching to the body would be impossible. It would never match as the body is swinging back and forth. And if we watch it, we can see they're not, they're kind of moving at the same speed. The edge of this and this they're close. And if it's behind the body, there we go, then you can't tell, really, because of course it's going to move more than the head. That's the way it's swinging back and forth. But hiding it so we don't have to see where it actually matches up, that's totally a valid way to work because then you don't have to worry about it. The other issue that would have to be dealt with manually is the fact that, let me go back to the unfinished one. If we put anchor points on the foot, so that we can do this. And then we put anchor points on this so we can move that back and forth. However, what happens is when I move this is that the foot doesn't follow with that. Now, there are a couple of very complicated tools in here to make that happen. I don't believe that's what they did. I'm pretty sure what they did, if I find the foot, is they manually had it follow the leg. And your order of operations, should you do this, would be to, you could actually even, as you're animating, sort of make the foot invisible and kind of like figure out how you want this to move, kind of swing the legs back and forth, get your timing down without the feet there. And then you would match the feet to the legs so that they look like they're in the same place. You would kind of make sure it's connecting at the same place as you're going through time. And then the last thing you would do, once you knew it was matching sort of as a translate, then you would start adding in the rotations. Because if you try to like move this and then rotate it to where you want, you're doing a lot of extra work, and it may not be that you put the translates in the right spot. So they manually did this. They didn't add in any bones or anything like that. They manually made sure. If you have some snapping enabled, no, that wouldn't work because there's nothing here to snap to. So it's a little bit of eyeballing it, but that's what they did here, and it turned out fine. There's so much other stuff going on, especially with the tail going back and forth, that you'd have to really be watching to notice if there's any shifts. So that's okay. But that's one of the things you run into when you have characters like this. It's one of the reasons I said, don't have these compound hinges. It's why they gave him these rubber hose legs. So there's no knee joint. It's just the legs are already bent because he's a crazy monkey. And if he's always hanging there, depending on what you're animating, that you could maybe get away with that. And other situations might call for a slightly different rig. Same feet, maybe different legs. Whatever it is. The arm is all one piece. There's no wrist, there's no elbow, because we don't need it, right? We don't need... Doesn't quite line up with this. There's only so much you can do there. But the animation on the character is fine, right? So that's just something to keep in mind while you're working, is that we have to kind of hide the seams and work within the bounds of what we have here. And some things can be very subtle and wonderful, and some we kind of have to cheat. All right, so as you're planning your characters, be aware of that. The last thing I want to go over is a reminder that when you're working, you may, if you double click, find yourself inside a particular symbol. Just be aware that you were there, and that if you want to do something else, you have to go back out here. Excuse me. The other thing to keep in mind is that let's say I want to move all the pieces of the head into the head, right? Pretty standard operating procedure. I'm like, you know what, for this shot I need them in there. And so maybe I make a duplicate of the head, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut these, and I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to say paste, and oh, they end up in the wrong spot, and I remember that there is a paste in place, and I do that, and they still end up in the wrong spot. Why do they end up in the wrong spot? Well, let me undo and get rid of my square. So this particular setting, which I believe is 409 by 339, that makes sense. But it's a grid, and it starts at 0, 0 up here, and positive X numbers go across, so that's the 409, and then positive Y numbers go down. This is the reverse of your geometry class, but it is a certain size. And so what's technically happening is this eyeball is set at X301, Y121. So it's 301 across and 121 pixels down. It's a coordinate system. This is really complicated battleship, basically. Now the problem is, if I grab this and I go inside the head and I place it in here, and even if I put it paste in place, 301 to 121 in here doesn't start over here. It starts like there, like somewhere over here in the top left corner of what makes up this space. So to put this in the right spot, we would have to have it at completely different numbers because it's smaller. This is a smaller area. It's different coordinate system because it's a smaller area. All right, there's just less pixels in there. The other thing that you may notice, and it's more obvious if I take all the pieces, so bear with me one second. I'm going to cut these out. You can see how big these are. And I go in here, and I place them in here, and they are completely the wrong size. This is because this was taken out of the library. This? Yeah. If I bring this out here, see how much bigger this actually is? So technically what happened is when they built this character, they built the head, they brought it out of the library, and they shrunk it first. And they also shrunk the eyes. They kind of brought everything out and they're like, they placed it all together and they were like, for some reason, somewhere in the pipeline, they decided to shrink everything. Everything that's in the library is bigger than what you see here. I don't know why they did this. It's actually poor planning on their part. But what it means is that all this alignment that you have here, the easiest way to replicate it is to select everything at once and bring them all over at once. But the problem is that doesn't replicate their relative size to the thing that you're putting them in, which is a problem. And so you have to sit here and scale them up to match what was going on. That's too big. To match what was going on as best you can. Now, I can probably do this part more quickly. You would make yourself a piece of photo reference. First of all, I'm doing this based on nothing. That's close. I'm doing it based on my own memory, which is terrible because it's not my character. They're also a little bit too high up. So you would make yourself a piece of reference and then bring that in there and try to line them up. But that's probably easier than re-bringing them all in at size, relining them up, and then putting them inside there. So just be aware that that kind of thing can happen. So as you're working, if you bring something out of the library and you resize it, and then you take stuff that's out here that it's a certain size and you put it in there, they're not going to be the right relative size. So like I said, this was poor planning or something on their part. There was no reason why they couldn't leave this size and just have a bigger file, because this is not a big file. But that is what happened. So if you're working on someone else's pipeline, you could very easily end up with something like that. Oh, whoops. I accidentally deleted something from the library because that's what I had selected. And that would make it gone for good, by the way. If you delete something from here, let me see here. It goes away from everywhere. So you can delete something from the stage and it's still in the library to be brought back out later. However, if you delete something from the library, poof, it's gone forever from everything. All right. Now, the last thing that we went over today, which is semi-unrelated, but it's related in the sense that we're working on a longer project. Not too long, but longer than usual by a couple weeks. You'll see there's an asterisk here on everything because I haven't saved anything. I'm just working on stuff just to show you guys. But let's say you're working on something that you want to be done. First of all, you should be saving all the time. Control S. I want you guys to, I want it to be muscle memory that every so often you just bang, you just Control S and you save your file. But the other thing you can do is File, Save As, something, 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 B. And then you work for a while more, several hours.